Hello and welcome to Top 8 coverage of the Eternal Extravaganza 6 Platinum Satellite hosted by the Bearded Dragon Games in Bernardsville, New Jersey. So we're just going to quickly go through the bracket and who we feel is favored in each match. So in the 1-8 matchup, we have Joe Brennan on Bug Delver against Luis Fada on D&T. So how do you feel that matchup's going to go?
I think it's close. I actually think that Joe's deviations could stand to hurt him. He has no true names. He has a V-click, which falls flat in the face of Caracas. He has two anglers, which are going to be kind of nice, but he doesn't have additional removal, I feel, that will help him. And how many fatal? He has 2 fatal push? Okay.
Yeah.
He could be okay, and a full 4 decay is good,
Yeah.
but his divert and his misdirection are not going to be great.
Yeah, but they could just be force fodder. I agree that Joe's choices may be worse than the other cards that would be played in that slot, but I still give him the slight edge in the matchup.
He has the play though, so I'm gonna go with Joe, but I think it'll go 3.
Yeah. So in the 4-5 matchup, which is going to be our backup match this round, we have Shardless against the 4-color control deck. So how do you feel about that matchup?
I think it's another close one. I think that I'm actually going to give the nod to Shardless because I think their raw card advantage can get through, and I don't think that the 4-color deck has enough pressure to close early before things like Ancestral Vision can take over.
Okay.
I think that the 4-color deck has some real chops in sideboarding if they have Pyroblasts and stuff, or Painful Truth or something like that.
And then real quick, because we do have magic that's actually happening, we're going to try to quick this up. In the Eldrazi versus Infect matchup, do you feel Infect is fast enough to crush it?
Yeah, I think that is all about Chalice and Force.
Okay. And then Elves versus Blue-Black Reanimator, you think Elves is too slow, right?
That's a nightmare for Elves.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to cut to some actual magic now. We have Joe on the play, who turn 1...
No, we've got this is Kenny Latham on Blue-Black Reanimator and Tom Ellis on Elves.
So this is the 3-6, and there's a turn 2 Iona.
A turn 2 Iona naming green.
So this game's over. So we're going to try to cut to a different match because this game is literally over.
They're not literally over.
Tom Ellis
They're both at 20.
Cannot cast any more spells this game, period. So he's going to die to 5 hits.
Yeah, so like when we were talking about like musing about Iona going in and out, Iona is just
lights out in certain
lights
matchups.
Out against Elves.
Yeah. So now we're where we thought we were going to be with Joe Brennan against Luis Fada, but the names are swapped.
Yep. So we got Joe Brennan on the play, the 1 seed. This is the match I really wanted to watch, so I'm glad that this is the match we're covering.
Yes. And so, obviously, Joe's deck's beautiful. Tons of expeditions, black duels.
Yeah, but I mean, Lewis just rebounded from the round 1 draw to
and just rallied
stick
every
it out.
other round.
Lewis is a very good Death and Taxes player.
Yeah, we saw he played really, really tight in the early rounds.
So so Joe having the play is hugely relevant. I think getting the Death Ride out turns on his, and he does have dazes, right?
Yeah. He plays days, yes.
He's got 3 or 4?
I think he's on 4, he's on 4 days.
Yeah, so it turns on his dazes and lets him get those into play out ahead of any of the Vial shenanigans.
Yeah, getting to daze the turn 1 Vial significantly stronger than having to force it.
Joe is pretty solidly favored in the games that he's on the play.
Yeah, especially with 4 decay.
Yep, and like he doesn't have like some of the mopey Tarmogoyfs either.
Yeah, he doesn't have any.
He's
real
not as weak to
going
Rest
on.
in Peace
Yeah.
from the board.
Yeah, so we're gonna let them know that they're good to start, and we'll cut into some more magic. But we are pretty confident that Tom Ellis did drop that game 1 to a resolved Iona, Shield of Emeria, naming green, because that's what happens when you're Elves.
So Joe has the Delver on the play, which is a good vote of confidence for him.
Off of a fetch, likely for a duel.
So like this comes up, and we were talking about this in the abstract earlier. I think that even though Death and Taxes is the de facto like destroy your lands, port you, waste you deck, I think he's still right to fetch a duel because it turns on both of his spells, and Lewis wastelanding into the face of a threat is not the right way to go.
So here we see Joe shortcutting his having things to do in his untap step by just not untapping his land. For anyone who's confused by that, he pointed to the Delver to indicate he was floating the trigger, and he's going to brainstorm above it, very likely to rig the trigger.
We can tell that Joe really wants to get the evasive clock started as soon as possible, and I also like this line from him.
Yeah, and here we see him
flips
revealing
to force
of will.
so he can hold down.
How do we feel about revealing our hard counter? Do we think that this is to try to lure his opponent into playing into a daze?
I
Yes,
think
okay.
it worked really well
Yeah.
because that's exactly what happened. Yeah,
Masterful play from Joe.
I think that's good. I don't necessarily know that he has to reveal the force. I think he still gets the same situation to occur pretty much regardless. But I really did like that sequencing and a little bit of a pump fake by him to be like, oh, you really need to respond now because my hard counter's on top of my deck.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not a blind flip. He brainstormed it, so he walked him right into it.
Yeah.
Like he knew, Lewis knows, like when he's casting that swords, that because he flipped it with force, that Joe very likely could have kept force in his hand if he wanted to.
Yeah, so now we see the actual force and then a cavern, likely naming human. So not only does Luis only have the 4 swords, but this is also apparently not a juicy enough threat for Joe to be willing to be down a card over.
I think fighting over the first one with Daze allows you to recast or replay Deathrite Shaman and still spend a maximum amount of mana that turn, so I really like that, but I don't like fighting over the subsequent swords.
But Joe also just has a lot of 2 and 3 mana reasonable plays, so the Deathrite being at least a bird's also going to help him
When
find
Joe
a
was
new
in the
threat.
booth, we talked about how he feels that legacy players take Brainstorm for granted to a degree because he's got a vintage background, and he's being pretty aggressive with his Brainstorms in this matchup. But it makes a ton of sense because the Thalia dynamic is pretty important.
Yeah.
And like something like Spirit of the Labyrinth, which Lewis doesn't have, but very well could, or Prelate even, makes it so that you can't take your Brainstorms with you. So I kind of like him being aggressive with them because he just really wants to flood the board with threats as soon as possible. And
he also looked like his hand had a more than 2 lands along with a fetch land. So he just he had a fetch land and a land that wasn't a fetch. So he already knew he had at least 1 card he didn't really want right now.
Yep. It's also facilitating his delve creatures. He has 2 main deck copies of Gurmag Angler.
Yeah. So he's incentivized to just be burning off spells.
For sure.
Something we used to see with Treasure Cruise when it was legal for a short period.
Such a beautiful, high-velocity, amazing...
Before we decided that 4 Ancestral Recalls was too good for Legacy when we're not allowed to play Ancestral Recall. Very difficult design mistake for WotC to make.
That card won me a big Legacy tournament.
Very...
Some people might not know that.
Big ups to WotC R&D for printing Ancestral Recall and not realizing it. Real difficult to remember fetch lands exist.
Yeah, so Delve is a broken mechanic.
Yes.
It's just a hands down one of the most broken mechanics ever printed.
But at least they didn't print Probe again for us.
Yeah, I mean, at least it's not Cascade.
At least the Cascade creature doesn't have haste because someone changed the design file in the last week. So this Revoker is going to be quite good, but we do know Joe has the Force. You think this is good enough to Force?
Well, there's a Cavern, but the Cavern's on Human, right?
Yeah. Well, we don't know. We believe it's on Human, but it's unlikely it was on Horror, at least. Could have been an Artificer for Stoneforge. Also, I think that Horror is pretty low on the list unless it's already in your hand. But we do see Joe just letting it resolve. This may mean he has an Abrupt Decay. This may mean he just doesn't care and wants to attack with 1/2s.
Another Brainstorm from Joe.
And it looks like he brainstormed into the 4th one.
I think that might be a Daze. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, these masks
I see a Wasteland, though, which is going to be good.
Yeah. The Wasteland being able to tag the Cavern and turn back on the Force, or potentially turn off the Port if he feels that his mana is being too denied. But with double Deathrite, relatively unlikely that he is concerned about his mana development.
So Lewis has been doing a great job of taking his lumps and staying the course, as this Revoker did give him some value, and he's still got some spells in hand that he can... There we go. There's a Fatal Push from
So this
Joe.
Fatal Push is going to take care of the artifact creature. Luis, not 100% sure how Fatal Push works. Wondering whether it's exiled or not. They got that straightened out right away, though. Just used to casting 1-mana things and things going to the exiled zone as the Swords to Plowshares player.
I like Joe's deck configuration a lot because it puts a lot of tension on Lewis's sideboard choices, whereas Rest in Peace would be a slam dunk. Now it's kind of a tough call.
Yeah, because there are no Tarmogoyfs, he's only holding Deathrites, but the Deathrites are reasonable 1/2s.
Oh, there's a good one.
Yeah, that's quite good. But I think Joe may have the Decay. Oh,
he has
and
the Daze. Wow.
Yeah. The spine-crushing Daze.
Wow, your last card is Daze. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
There's
And
the Decay. Does have the
confident flip of the Abrupt Decay. So this game is all but over. Even though Luis's life total is really high, so it's actually not all but over. But it's becoming out of reach quite quickly. I think he has about a turn or two to restabilize, and if he's not able to do that, he's going to find himself quite dead.
He could get back into it a little bit with some Flicker Wisps if they started coming down the pipeline.
So he ripped a Sarah Avenger return. That's not awful. That'll certainly cold the insect elaboration as it at least trades, and that's the floor, and it'll also stop this second death rate from continuing to attack. You'll notice Joe is attacking because he doesn't have a second
Well,
black
he's
source.
another swords. Wow.
I think this is the third. I think that for each swords Joe's had a brainstorm, which is about fair in my mind.
And it's been 2 delvers, 3 swords because the one got dazed.
Yeah. And so here we see a follow-up second Rashadan port, potentially activating in the upkeep to cut off a color of mana.
I think it's likely that Lewis ports in the upkeep.
Yeah. What do you think he targets?
The green source.
Okay. I think that's reasonable. Yeah.
No, probably the black
he
source
just drains in response.
is deckless. Oh yeah, so that way if he
actually burns the mana off.
if he gets a full mana away, that's why I like the green source.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Joe able to rip a second black source. So because of the velocity at which Joe's deck churns through itself, these death rates just have enough food that they will lethal him. There are certainly 5 spells between the both of their bins, and Joe obviously confident in this fact by not attacking.
The Stonefort or Sarah.
Yeah, this is the Sarah Avenger we saw him pick up last turn. I think he's drawn mostly lands since then, but we also know Joe's last card's an Abrupt Decay. So this is just.
It's possible Lewis is just running out this Avenger to eat an Abrupt Decay and just prolong the.
But I think
that's fine. He gains you 4 life.
I think I just drained twice and then just cast the decay off of floating mana from these ports instead.
I think it's correct for for Joe to not decay here. I think he's supposed to just.
I think I fetch up something like an Bayou
or Bayou. I'd probably
double
find
activate.
Bayou. Yeah. And double activate.
And then in response to the port, you get the mana back towards your decay. When he
just doesn't have any copies of Bayou in his deck.
That would be a good reason to not fetch for it. Yeah. It's pretty reasonable. I mean, he does have a relatively light green, or never mind. No, he's super in on green. He just doesn't need the greedy splash out of Grixis, so he's able to confidently just.
Well, he has no him, so he doesn't need Bayou.
So he's able to just jam.
Most of his cards are blue.
Yeah, he also has the basic swamp. So he's not that worried about the exact same source that the Bayou would represent. He's chosen to be more insulated against Wasteland with a basic land instead.
And Lewis grabbed another Plains.
Yeah, this game is not looking great for Lewis.
He's got something going on.
So the Flicker Wisp here, flickering his own port, though? I'm not certain I like that.
Well, it just opens him up to drawing. He gets to force the action then, and
but he's just a functional one.
Well, now I think I would target the green source.
I think I would just target a death rate to turn off a turn. Oh, no, it doesn't do anything because it comes back end step? Okay.
He's got an out to drawing GT now.
That's fair. Yeah, I believe he's at 5, so he's just at a functional 1. But if he draws GT and goes to equip, so Joe is not on that Abrupt Decay anymore, right? He cast it to
he cast it to kill the Sarah Avenger, so
GT's
Lewis has a small window that he could dive through.
But if he fails to produce a GT, this game should be over. Because 1 swords won't do it, and he doesn't have 2 more swords. He doesn't get to play 5 of them. So he only has 1 that he can draw to, and the death rate that he swords will just drain him to 3. The other, he's just dead.
Yep, he's picking him up. So game 1 goes to Joe Brennan on the play, as we suspected.
Yep. So now we can take a peek at the sideboard. So Joe has the All-Star Dread of Night, along with 2 copies of Painful Truths, 2 copies of Flusterstorm, another fantastic card in Marsh Casualties, and Engineered Explosives, a Joe Brennan trademark of Royal Assassin, 2 Baleful Strix,
very interesting.
2 Surgical Extraction, and Notion Thief, and 2 Pith Needle. Joe's been known to be ballsy enough to main deck a Royal Assassin now and again at Monday Night Locals.
I like, from Joe's perspective, I like the Dread of Night, obviously. I like the Marsh Casualties. I like the Explosives. I like the Strixes.
Yeah. I think that
trimming days on the draw and Spell Pierce.
I think
get that out of there.
The cards like Dread of Night and Marsh Casualties are just going to be insane if he sees them.
Also, Divert and Misdirection can get cut as well.
So he did see 4 swords game 1 though, and I mean we know that Luis has access to, and Joe knows this as well, 2 more paths, 2 paths, 3 paths, 2 paths.
Joe has efficient removal too, though.
Yeah, but so I'm boarding out the Divert, but maybe I leave in the 1 Misdirection to just try to catch him, where you like get him to swords his own mom. Or something silly like that. Like you're always gonna have a target.
I understand the theory behind it, but I think that one of the ways that Joe can lose is by having too many reactive cards and just not being able to get out there.
But I think
getting stuck under a Thalia and then be